Imagine spending nearly 2 decades racing in NASCAR. You've made 248 starts in the Truck and Xfinity Series, you've raced at Talladega 9 times, and a team just announced you as their driver for your first Cup Series start. They released the paint scheme and you film a promo video. Your phone is blowing up with congratulations. And then, 4 days before the race, NASCAR calls and just says no. That's exactly what happened to Jennifer Jo Cobb in 2021, and she's not alone. NASCAR has a driver approval process that's secretive, inconsistent, and has torpedoed the dreams of multiple drivers, some with decades of experience and some without. And as of this week, as you may have heard, the latest name on that list is one of the most popular motorsports personalities on the internet, Cletus McFarland. Today we're breaking down some of the other drivers who have gotten the door slammed in their face and asking whether NASCAR's approval system is actually working the way it should. Before we get into the stories, let's talk about how this process actually works, or maybe doesn't. NASCAR has what it calls a resume committee. A driver wanting to compete in a new series or at certain track types that they haven't previously been approved for has to submit their racing history for review. The committee is made up of NASCAR competition officials, not current drivers. They evaluate the experience and on-track performance before deciding if a driver is cleared. Here's the catch. The criteria is not public. There's no published standard, no point system, and no clear checklist. It's entirely at NASCAR's direction, and as we'll see, that discretion has produced some decisions that are very hard to explain. The approval process came sharply into focus in early 2025 when Katherine Legg's 2-spin Cup debut at Phoenix started to raise some serious questions. NASCAR had approved her based on her IndyCar experience and some of her ARCA starts, and the incident reignited a debate that drivers, owners, and media have had for years. Kyle Busch put it bluntly, "I think it's broken." So let's look at the cases that prove his point. Jennifer Jo Cobb's story might be the most infuriating one on this list. In April of 2021, Rick Ware Racing announced that Cobb would make her first Cup debut in the number 15 car at Talladega Superspeedway, which would have made her the first woman to compete in a Cup race since Danica Patrick drove in the 2018 Daytona 500. She had the car, she had the sponsor, Arrowhead Brass. The paint scheme was out and she had already filmed a promotional video. She had credentials that any rational person would look at and say, yeah, she's qualified. She had 15 consecutive years of experience in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, including 31 starts, plus 219 starts in the NASCAR Truck Series. 9 of those truck starts were at Talladega specifically. She knew that track, and here's the kicker. 6 years earlier, she had actually been approved to run in the Cup Series at every track. That approval came via a quick phone call, because the series didn't have a formal committee at the time. NASCAR denied approval just days before the race, forcing Rick Ware Racing to scramble for another driver. NASCAR President Steve Phelps defended the decision, saying that in the opinion of series officials, Jennifer wasn't ready to race in this race. The stated reason was primarily her on-track performance. Specifically, she only had 11 lead lap finishes in her 217 truck starts. But here's where the inconsistency gets glaring. Just 2 months earlier, NASCAR allowed 1990 Daytona 500 winner Derek Cope, who hadn't competed in a NASCAR race since 2018 and whose last top 10 finish came in 1997, to compete in that very same Daytona 500 for that very same Rick Ware Racing team. He completed just 3 laps before causing the first caution of the race. Cope approved, Cobb denied. Phelps even said in the same breath that NASCAR was trying to diversify its drivers' core. Women and people of color were things he called very important to the sport, but Jennifer wasn't ready, he said. Cobb herself said it best. She told Sirius NASCAR Radio, "I just want to be judged by the same criteria that every other 21-year-old Cup Series rookie has been judged by, and I don't believe that just happened." She also pointed out something that deserves to be heard. "I wasn't given any parameters of how I can gain that approval. No roadmap, no standards, just a phone call saying no." Fast forward to January of 2025, Mike Wallace, 65 years old, with 809 career NASCAR National Series starts, 197 of them in the Cup Series, including 11 Daytona 500s, got a phone call that stopped him cold. He wasn't actively looking for a ride. The opportunity came through Carl Long of MBM Motorsports, who posted on Facebook asking why he couldn't find any drivers to bring sponsorship money. Wallace called him and said, "What about an old guy?" The plan was sentimental too. Wallace was looking to pay tribute to his wife, who had just passed away the year before. He had commitments, he had sponsors lined up, and he had gotten congratulatory calls from NASCAR's own leadership. Over the preceding month, he received many congratulatory calls from Steve Phelps, Mike Helton, and other members of NASCAR's leadership team. He brought equipment, and he had a seat mold poured. Then the call came. Wallace wrote that he was not approved to race in the Cup, Xfinity, or Truck Series in 2025, and that he could go through the process and possibly get approved for 2026. The reasoning? Wallace had not competed on an intermediate or larger oval since the 2015 Daytona 500. A decade of inactivity, even with 11 previous Daytona 500 starts and multiple wins at the track, was enough to shut the door. Here's the contrast that makes this sting. That same 2025 Daytona 500 featured Helio Castroneves, a four-time Indy 500 winner, making his Daytona 500 debut on a special exemption provisional. Carlos Suarez, after Castroneves' weekend, said plainly, "If you ask me, do I think Helio was 100% ready? I don't think so, even though he's a world-class driver." Castroneves got in, and Mike Wallace, a man who had won at Daytona, did not. Cobb and Wallace weren't alone. This list goes back even further. In 2020, IndyCar and sports car driver James Davidson was entered to run at Talladega in the Cup Series. NASCAR realized he had never raced on an oval in NASCAR, and they stepped in, saying he would have to make his Cup debut at Pocono, a 2.5-mile track with high straightaway speeds. The logic there was hard to follow. There's also the Tanner Berryhill case from 2018. NASCAR permitted Berryhill to compete in the final two Cup races, including the championship, despite having never started a Cup race before and having last run in the Xfinity Series in 2014. The championship race with zero Cup experience, and he got approved. And more recently, Catherine Legg's Cup debut at Phoenix in 2025 produced 2 spins and collected Daniel Suarez, reigniting the whole debate. NASCAR had approved her on the basis of her IndyCar and ARCA experience. Denny Hamlin called her performance impressive given the equipment she was in, but said it should open eyes that the sport isn't very strict about who gets to run Cup cars. The through line in all of these cases is the same. Nobody knows what the standard is, which means the standard shifts depending on who's asking and who's making the call. And now this week, the story that brought this whole conversation back to the surface. Cletus McFarland, or Garrett Mitchell, a YouTube star with nearly 5 million subscribers, a man who has built a massive motorsports following through his Freedom Factory operation, has been trying to work his way into NASCAR legitimately. He's done ARCA, and he's made his Truck Series debut at Daytona, where he qualified 12th even though he crashed off turn 4 on lap 6. He then made his O'Reilly Auto Parts Series debut at Rockingham with RCR, and he started 35th, spun out multiple times, but finished the race, and he did bring out the final caution when he spun off turn 4. He was hoping that performance would be enough to get him approved for Talladega. NASCAR denied that request last Tuesday. Cletus addressed his fans directly. "I made my O'Reilly Series debut last Saturday with hopes of getting approval for Talladega, but they did not see enough. I need more windshield time. I've got a lot to learn, and it's a little bit of a kick in the nuts, but I just have to get out there and do as much learning as possible, and then hopefully I'll get to run Daytona and Talladega next year." Dale Earnhardt Jr. weighed in on his podcast and was equally straightforward. "I saw enough to not approve him for Daytona or Talladega in the O'Reilly Series, to be quite honest with you," Earnhardt said. Here's the thing, though. Cletus has actually handled this better than almost anyone else on this list. He didn't fight it, he didn't call it unfair, and he acknowledged what he saw in himself, and NASCAR, to their credit, was transparent about what they needed to see from him. More short track time, more ARCA, and more reps. NASCAR President Steve O'Donnell said he can still earn approval. They just need to see progression, race by race. And that's actually what a functioning system looks like. The question is, why did it take until 2026 to get here? NASCAR's approval process had been broken for a long time. Inconsistent, secretive, and applied differently based on factors that never get explained publicly. Jennifer Jo Cobb had almost 250 starts and and was denied without being given a single parameter to hit. Mike Wallace had 11 Daytona 500s under his belt and couldn't get back in. And drivers with far thinner resumes have been waved through without a second thought. Cletus McFarland's situation actually gives him some reason for optimism. NASCAR engaged with it publicly. They explained the reasoning and gave him a path forward, but one transparent decision doesn't fix the system that has quietly been making very different calls behind closed doors for decades. NASCAR says it wants to grow the sport, and it wants new audiences and new faces. But if the door policy is this murky, it's going to keep creating stories that make the sanctioning body look arbitrary at best, and like they're playing favorites at worst. If you want more deep dives into the stories NASCAR doesn't always want told, subscribe and hit the bell. And in the comments, let me know, do you think that NASCAR's approval system is broken? What changes would you like to see from them?